Ms. Martin-Moore, it's Megan Marshall. Are we waiting on Blair to do any other troubleshooting, or?
Let's check. Blair, are we good to start?
I believe so.
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
All right, perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Marshall. I am the committee chair of the Medical Marijuana Advisory Committee, and I will now call this meeting to order at 10:04 a.m. Today's meeting is proceeding virtually through Skype. The public has been provided the sign-on information to attend and observe this meeting. Because this meeting is virtual, I would ask that the members to clearly speak, identifying themselves first, and then proceed when I do acknowledge them. Please be advised that this meeting is being recorded. Also, please be mindful that the staff are taking minutes, so no more than one person should be speaking at a time. So at this time, I'd like to take the official roll call of the members who are present today. Ms. Seidel.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Abel.
Present.
Mr. Coder.
Present. Thank you.
I'm going to check Mr. Hirsch one more time. I didn't hear him earlier. All right, Mr. Caseman.
Present.
Ms. Lawrence.
Present.
Sheriff Lenhart. Sheriff Lenhart, are you there? There you are. Are you off mute, Sheriff Lenhart? I see his video. I'm just not here. Oh, he says hi. Okay, we'll take the the visual acknowledgement from Sheriff Lenhart. Dr. Mitchell.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Walsh Mosca.
Present.
Mr. Stanek.
Present.
Dr. Wank.
Present.
Dr. Soin.
Present.
And Mr. Stock.
Present.
All right. Seeing enough to constitute a meeting, we will move ahead. Board member or committee members, excuse me. Everyone was given a copy of the meetings from the meeting minutes from the last meeting from March 5th, 2020. At this time, do I hear any, or would anybody like to make any changes to those meeting minutes? Seeing none, do I have, oh, pardon, go ahead. All right, seeing no changes to the meeting minutes of March 5th, I will actually entertain a motion to approve those draft minutes from the March 5th, 2020 Advisory Committee.
This is Marcy Seidel. I so move.
Thank you, Ms. Seidel.
Mosca, second.
Thank you, Ms. Mosca. Seeing those two, I will run through for approval from the board. Ms. Seidel?
Yes.
Ms. Abel?
Approve.
Mr. Coder?
Yes.
Mr. Caseman?
Yes.
Ms. Lawrence?
Yes.
Sheriff Lenhart? I think Sheriff might be having some audio issues. Dr. Mitchell?
Yes.
Ms. Mosca?
Yes.
Mr. Stanek?
Yes.
Dr. Wank?
Yes.
Dr. Soin?
Yes.
And Mr. Stock?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Those meeting minutes are approved as written. All right, before we go ahead and start with the program updates, there are a few items for committee business that we'd like to address this morning. Again, just want to remind everybody of the committee ground rules that we do have here with our advisory committee. Although this is a public meeting, the committee will not be accepting any testimony or public comments during this meeting. Any rules that are up for review will be subject to several rounds of public comments. To stay up to date on any public comment periods regarding our rules, I encourage everyone to sign up for the email updates on the Medical Marijuana Committee homepage at www.medicalmarijuana.ohio.gov. All right, so with us today are three representatives from the three state agencies responsible for the Medical Marijuana Control Program. I will now turn things over to the program team. I do ask that the committee members do hold all questions until each of the state agencies have had the opportunity to discuss. And at this time, I'd like to, before we introduce our first presenter, I do want to take this time to formally introduce our next speaker. At our last meeting, everyone should be aware that Executive Director Stephen Shearholt stated that the Board of Pharmacy was interviewing candidates for the open position of as the Director of the Medical Marijuana Operations for the State of Ohio Board of Pharmacy. As the committee chair of the Medical Marijuana Committee, I would like to formally welcome Ms. Sharon Martin Moore to our team. And I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Ms. Martin Moore.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate it. I am very happy to be here today. I was very hopeful that I would be able to meet you all in person, but unfortunately that has not happened. So we appreciate the advisory committee's willingness to sort of roll with things and go ahead with this meeting virtually. We didn't really want to delay it any longer, so we appreciate you all being here. I know sometimes we have some technical glitches, so hopefully everything will go smoothly today. So the first thing I'll start out talking about is our patient and caregiver registry. Our numbers at this time continue to go up. We have a total of just over 147,000 total recommendations with 116,497 registered patients and 13,140 registered caregivers. We have had an uptick in registrants since the COVID crisis began. Generally, we've been adding about 5,000 new registered patients per month to the program. And it jumped to around 6,000 in April, and in May and June, it jumped to about 7,000 and 7,800 respectively. So we will keep monitoring that to see if the numbers do continue to increase or if they start to level off to the numbers that they were at before COVID started.
Sure, are there many patients?
Okay, Blair, are you able to? Thank you. And then this is a chart that I know you guys have seen in the past regarding the ages of the registered patients that we have.
Ms. Martin Moore, real quick, I apologize. It's Megan. I apologize for interrupting. We are not seeing the presentation. I'm not sure if it's just on my end, but I wanted to make sure that we are seeing the slides that you are presenting, if there should be slides that we should be seeing right now.
This is Mosca. I'm seeing them.
Mike Stanek, I'm seeing them.
All right.
I see them as well. Yep, I see them.
Okay, I'll hold up a minute. We'll see if Blair can fix that.
Go ahead and proceed. You're good.
Can you see them now?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. I see them twice now, but okay. As long as you can see them. So the age range, we generally have about 20% of the population in their, each age range for 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And then we have a much smaller population for under 18 and about 11% for 18 to 29 and 8.26 for our patients that are ages 70 and older. Oh, I'm sorry. I might have messed up Blair's thing. Can you still see it?
This is Sheriff Linhart. I can see it out here.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So then this is our chart, which I also know you've seen in the past regarding patients by condition type. Obviously, the most prevalent condition that patients register for is pain, and that continues to be the highest. And generally, these stay right around the same percentage-wise in terms of the individual's diagnosis. It is important to note that some of the patients have more than one diagnosis, so obviously these numbers are higher than our total patient population. We'll go on to a dispensary update. We currently have 51 dispensaries that are in operation right now. We also have an additional 6 dispensaries that have provisional licenses, and we are still working with those dispensaries to get them opened as quickly as possible. Those have all been delayed due to various litigation issues with them, but we are optimistic that they will all be opening, which will increase our total up to 57 dispensaries. These are our total employee numbers. As you can see, in the dispensary side of things, we have just over 1,100 total employees who are registered to work through the Board of Pharmacy. I read yesterday that the number of national cannabis industry employees is increasing, and it's expected to rise this year by about 50%. So those numbers will continue to go up as the new dispensaries open. One thing we get a lot of questions about is whether the board is going to approve a new RFA, a request for applications to open additional dispensaries throughout the state. Pursuant to the administrative code, the board is required to look at that every 2 years and determine whether there is a sufficient number of dispensaries open, and that is based on the population of the state, the number of patients that we have using medical marijuana, and the geographic distribution of the dispensary sites. So two of the things that we have done in order to help assess this, as well as for other reasons, are the patient survey, which I believe Executive Director Shearhold told you at the last meeting was going to be happening. And we also had we've completed a dispensary survey as well. So those are two of the pieces of information that we are looking at in regards to the biennial review. The patient survey has gone out in the last few days. It was sent to all registered patients and caregivers, and it is going to be open through September 1st of this year. As of yesterday, we had about 9,500 responses so far. We are expecting that to rise, and in a couple weeks, we will send a reminder out to those who have not responded, because we would really like to get the patient feedback from as many people as we can. And that information will also be reviewed to determine whether new dispensaries open, what types of product education and program education would be helpful for patients, what their dispensary experiences have been like, so ways we can work with the dispensaries to improve the program for their patients, how often they visit, what their preferred products are, and we would also like to learn about their experiences with some of the changes that the board has implemented temporarily regarding COVID. And we also have the results from our dispensary survey, and this survey occurred prior to COVID, so that would probably affect some of these responses. But we wanted to know how far patients were traveling to a dispensary, and as you can see, the vast majority are traveling 10 to 30 miles or less than 10 miles. But we do have a population that is traveling greater distances of 30 to 60 miles and over 60 miles as well. How much time a patient spends at a dispensary? Most of our dispensaries are saying that they see patients for about 15 to 30 minutes. Some are less. Presumably those are patients that are more familiar with the products and know exactly what they want. And 100% of our dispensaries are saying that their average wait time is 0 to 15 minutes. So I'm not sure if the patients will say the same thing, but it will be interesting to compare the dispensary responses with the patient responses in that regard. And then this is a summary of some of the responses. I'll just highlight some of the important ones. I included the average response, and then the highest number that we received and the lowest number that we received in response. So most of the average dispensary is seeing about 36 new patients a week. The dispensary with the highest volume said they were seeing about 100 new patients, and the lowest said they were seeing about 2. the difference between the average number of patients that they've seen and the most that they're able to see. You can see the average dispensary says that they could see about 196 more patients than they're seeing, and the maximum is 470 and the lowest is 40. So they're all saying that they have additional capacity. So even as patients are added, they are able to serve those patients. So that's something that we will weigh into the decision as to whether or not there's a recommendation to the board that new dispensaries be opened. But again, obviously, we will be looking at the patient population, the patient responses, the distribution of patients, and the distribution of the medical marijuana dispensaries that we currently have. We also, the board sends out a monthly newsletter to all of the dispensaries, and we have different sections from our compliance, licensing, dispensary operations, different things that have come up during the month that we either need to notify the dispensaries of or we want to remind them of. So we asked about the content of our monthly newsletter, and most people were either satisfied or very satisfied or sort of neutral. So we had only maybe about less than 9% that were not satisfied. And the vast majority felt that the information that we were providing was relevant. So we will continue sending those newsletters and hoping to share important information with the dispensaries. The biggest thing that has happened since I started at the board, obviously, is COVID. And we hope that the board was very responsive in identifying some needs so that we could improve the experience for the patients and minimize their risk in obtaining their medical marijuana. So specifically, there were 4 major resolutions that were issued. The first one was the expansion of the caregiver registration. So we increased the number of caregivers that a patient could have up to 3, and the number of patients that a caregiver could serve up to 3 as well. And this was to hopefully reduce the number of patients that needed to go to the dispensary so that their caregiver could go and pick up their medical marijuana for them and deliver it and take it to them. We also made it easier for caregivers to register. Instead of having to be registered through the CTR physician, they can now register directly with the board staff and get added to the patient's account. We also changed our photo identification requirements, and this was primarily in response to the closing of the BMVs. We had a lot of patients whose identification expired, or if they lost their identification, they had no way of replacing it during the COVID closures of the BMV. So we did allow the dispensaries and the CTR physicians to accept expired identifications, and then also to accept other forms of ID, such as the birth certificate with proof of address in lieu of a driver's license. The board also allowed curbside pickup, as it's commonly known, or the sale of medical marijuana to patients and caregivers outside of the dispensary. And this was to try to encourage social distancing so that patients and caregivers did not have to enter the dispensary. They could place their order through phone or later online, which I'll get to in a minute. But they could have a dispensary staff person bring that outside. And we tried to do this as absolutely safely as we could for the patients and for the dispensary employees. So we did require that a security person be present and that all of these transactions occur under video camera, that there be no home delivery, and that it must occur on the dispensary premises. We also have requirements in place for verifying who the person is, just like if they went inside the dispensary. The board also approved a resolution to accept phone and online orders. When it was originally implemented, it was only phone orders, and we got some feedback from the dispensaries as well as the patients that they were spending long periods of time waiting on the phone. So eventually we did add online ordering to that. We spent a lot of time working on this to ensure that patient personal information was secured, and we limited the amount that the dispensary could collect from them when they were placing their orders, the amount of information to try to protect the patients. So I believe we've approved 3 outside vendors who are doing online ordering in conjunction. They're in place with the dispensaries to do the online ordering. And then some of the dispensaries have actually created their own online ordering systems. And that can be as simple as some type of a form that the patient completes and it just gets submitted, or they actually have an ordering platform that they've created. We've also done several health reminders in terms of making sure that the dispensaries are complying with all the state requirements regarding their employees wearing masks and temperature checks and social distancing at the dispensaries. So we've done a few reminders to the dispensaries on that issue as well. One of the other big things that's happened, I think, since the last meeting that you had in March was a change to the way that days supply is calculated for patients. Under our old method of calculating days supply, I won't go into all of this, but we had a rolling system and it required 3 separate calculations, and then you'd have to look at whichever number was the lowest to determine the patient's days supply. And our patient and caregiver liaison, who is primarily responsible for helping patients with this calculation, told me it would take him about 10 minutes to do a calculation for a patient. It was a very confusing system. The 90 days sort of rolled, and the amount of medical marijuana that the patient could purchase depended on their prior purchase history. So the board worked with, I believe, some input from this committee as well on developing a new method of calculating days supply. It is much simpler. The 90-day period is divided into 2 45-day periods, and a patient can buy 45 days worth of medical marijuana products within that 45-day period at any point that they would like to. And then when the next 45-day period starts, they again are eligible for an additional 45 days of purchase. So this is just an example of the calculator. The board has, our board IT staff has been wonderful about creating various versions of this calculator. So we have an online version, we have a telephone version, we have a printable version. So it's fairly straightforward. The patient can just enter their first day of their recommendation, and it will automatically fill in all of these fill period dates. You can see the first fill period, they do get 46 days, and that is because of the day of the recommendation. But our call volume has significantly dropped regarding people needing to understand their day supply, because it is much simpler for the patients to determine now, and for the dispensaries to determine. And when we do get these emails and calls, it probably takes about a minute, maybe 30 seconds to tell a patient what their day supply is. We have gotten mostly positive feedback on the day's supply. So I'll just share a couple of the comments that we received. And I've removed any identifying information and even diagnosis information. But we had one patient who wrote to us and said, "My wife and I recently made it to the end of our individual 45-day supply, and the new system kept us in purchasable limits. Under the recent change, we were both able to treat our symptoms within the day's supply limits for the Ohio program. Thanks for changing the Ohio system to be more receptive to patients. This change legitimately helped us in addition to the substantial drop in prices experienced recently. Thank you for your efforts to change the system. That must have taken a lot of work, so I'm glad and supremely thankful you and your team were able to initiate the change for our health." And we've received several much shorter comments just thanking us and saying this seems to be a much simpler system. And in the interest of being fair and balanced, I will say we still do receive complaints. So one of the complaints was regarding the split in the periods, and that individual preferred that we just keep the 90-day 90-day period together and continue doing a rolling period. He felt that that worked better for him. But overall, I think it's been a very welcome change for the patients. The other big project that the medical marijuana team and the board have been working on is rule amendments. Since the program's been up and running, we've sort of been able to look and tweak some things and see where some improvements can be made. So there's been several actions taken in regard to the rule amendments. So just really quickly to touch on what the process is, we posted proposed rules, and I believe Erin shared those with the committee back in December. We solicited some feedback from patients and stakeholders, other agencies. Anyone who wanted to comment was welcome to. We took those comments as well as comments internally from the board staff and reviewed them and drafted some proposed changes for the Board of Pharmacy to review. And then once the Board of Pharmacy approves those changes, they are then sent to CSI, which is the Common Sense Initiative, which does essentially a business evaluation for the state. And once again, stakeholders are allowed to make comments to CSI, and then we review those comments and file a response, and CSI gives us a report. And then we move on to JCAR, which is the Joint Committee on Agency Rule Review in the legislature. And then they take a look at those rules, and hopefully after that they will go into effect. So that's just a brief summary of the rulemaking process, probably more than you want to know. But I just wanted to share that with you in the context of the rules. So we currently have separated our rules into two existing packets right now. We took what we considered to be sort of the most important rules that needed to be reviewed quickly. And the board approved sending these to CSI in May of 2020. And so this is just a summary of those rules that the board reviewed in May. And some key changes of those rules, the board elected to include additional forms of identification to prove Ohio residency. So under the current rule, you could use a driver's license or a passport, which we struggled with a little bit because the passport didn't actually prove Ohio residency. So the new rule has language that allows the board to approve other forms of residency. And in conjunction with that rule, the board also approved a resolution to allow that to go into effect currently. And patients can basically use any of the forms of ID that the BMV approves for obtaining a driver's license to prove their identification and their Ohio residency. Under the proposed rule changes, the 6-month registration period for terminally ill patients is also proposed to be eliminated, as well as the requirement that a terminally ill patient needs to be recertified after 6 months. So under the rule change, a terminally ill patient would still have a 1-year medical marijuana registration period versus 6 months. And that also the board put into a resolution, so that is currently in effect. The 90-day supply calculation, which I've already touched upon. Indigent and veteran status, we again just included a little bit more leeway for the board to be able to approve additional documentation and forms to establish indigent or veteran status. One of the bigger things that is in the rule proposal is the elimination of the Tier 1 and Tier 2 plant material. Under the current rules, those tiers are based on the concentration of, the percentage of the THC in the plant material. So under the proposed rule change, it would collapse the 2 tiers, and plant material would be treated the same regardless of that percentage. We also corrected the mathematical calculation. We've received a lot of patient complaints that a 1-day supply of plant material does not equate to 1/90th of the total amount of plant material that patients are allowed to purchase. So the proposed rule contains a change as to what the day's supply is, so it would correct that mathematical error, and a day's supply would indeed constitute 1/90th. It also includes a requirement that patches be labeled with their total THC content, and removal of the requirement that the manufacturers, or I'm sorry, the cultivators and processors list the target CBD on their product identifier assignment application. They would still be required to provide the CBD information to the patient that comes from the testing laboratory, but they would no longer have to provide us with a target when they're first registering their product. So those rules, as I indicated, were presented in May. They went to CSI. The CSI comment period was open through the end of May. The board received the comments from CSI, and at the last board meeting in July, the board approved a comment response for CSI. So right now we're waiting for that CSI process to conclude so we can go on to the next step of those rules. Then we had a second set of rules that were proposed to the board and approved by the board in June of 2020. And I did not list all the rules on the slide because there were 37 of them under this section of the administrative code. But just to highlight a couple of the important ones, under the current rules, a dispensary licensee must open the dispensary within 270 days of receiving their provisional dispensary license. And I'm sorry, within 180 days, and we're proposing extending that to 270 days with the requirement that each dispensary provide an updated progress report to the board every month to let us know what their progress is, and that's to hopefully keep any future dispensaries on track so that if there's any problems, they can be addressed quickly and the dispensaries can all open within their targeted time frame. There's also a proposed rule change to allow patients to request non-child resistant containers. We've had a lot of patients who do not have children in their house and they struggle with opening the containers. As I'm sure the committee knows, the containers are very difficult to open, and the reason for that is to keep them away from children. But they can also be difficult to open for some of our patients who struggle with opening them. And there's some very strict parameters that are included in the rule that govern when that would be allowed. We've also moved the printing of employee badges from being a board responsibility to being something that the dispensaries would do on their own. This allows them to include their own dispensary logo on it, as well as to have the badge more quickly when they have a new employee who's been approved by the board, rather than waiting for the board to get it to them. We've also expanded employee duties to report, and that's more to mirror traditional pharmacy. In the case of an employee who has either gotten in trouble in their private life, they have a duty to notify the board, or if they see something going on at the dispensary that would require board notification for investigation. We've also included some language allowing products to be returned to the dispensary under certain circumstances, and that would allow the dispensaries to have more of a process in place for accepting them. So those permissible returns would be allowed when there was a defective product, if the patient was provided with the incorrect item, or if they received some mislabeled medical marijuana product. It would also require dispensaries to accept a return of an item that has been recalled. We're also included some language to limit the discounts that dispensaries employees are allowed to receive, and so essentially they would be able to only receive the same discounts that patients can receive. And the dispensary access updates, those more clearly spell out when media and elected officials and their staff, as well as other administrators who want to visit a dispensary, exactly the timelines and when they can access those. We also had some patient amendments, and some new rules and a rescinded rule. The rescinded rule was actually replaced with a similar but more expansive rule. one of the issues that I think was maybe a little bit amplified by COVID was people requesting that an out-of-state family member be allowed to serve as their caregiver. And when we went back and looked at the rule in that regard, it wasn't entirely clear. So under the rule updates, we've put a process into place that allows an out-of-state caregiver to apply to be a caregiver, and it's subject to approval of the board. And just two examples of when that may happen. You may have a family member who is staying with someone in Ohio to provide them with care for a period of time, and they would like to be able to be their registered caregiver. We've also seen patients who live very close to the border areas, and they may live in Ohio, but they have a family member, for example, in West Virginia, who is their primary caregiver, and they would like that individual to be able to bring them their medical marijuana from the dispensary. This update does include requirements that the same sort of look into the caregiver's background be done that is done with any Ohio caregiver as well. And so these will be definitely carefully reviewed. Summary suspension. This allows a patient who is a danger to himself or others based on their medical marijuana use or acting outside the program to be summarily suspended. This is sort of codifying the process that the board uses to summarily suspend patients and caregivers currently. Confidentiality of patient identifying information. We already have a rule addressing that, but this expands on it a little bit just to clarify that if there is an adjudication hearing involving a patient, that their personal information is removed and not made public. And we also updated and created essentially a new rule addressing the release of confidential patient information that the board maintains. So there are very specific circumstances when the board will release it, and it will not be released outside of those. And then suspension of access to patient information, that would be in the event that a dispensary employee is inappropriately accessing patient information. And this would allow the board to suspend that access until an investigation is done and it's determined whether they should maintain that access. So this, oh, sorry, I think I have one more. And then the last set of rules had to deal with administration. There was really nothing substantive in these rules that I thought was important to point out to the committee. These were mostly just edits and clarifying language. So all these rules that were presented at the June meeting are currently pending in CSI as well, but they're at an earlier stage. So they are currently up for comment until I believe August 3rd. And then once that comment period closes, the board will once again review all those comments related to this rule. And that is everything that I have. So thank you for your attention and patience. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Martin-Moore. At this time, I'd like to open the floor to questions to our committee members, please.
This is Tony Coder. The issue on traveling over 60 miles for some patients, do we know if that was a location issue, that there was not a dispensary within 60 miles, or were patients traveling over 60 miles because of a unique strain? Do we know any of that information?
We do not know based on the dispensary survey. We're hoping to gain that information from the patient survey, because you're absolutely correct. There are some patients who want a specific product or prefer a specific dispensary, and they're willing to drive farther to achieve that. And then there are probably some patients who may not have a dispensary that is close to them or that is open when they need it to be open, and so they're traveling for another dispensary. So hopefully I'll have that for you next month. Or next meeting.
Thanks, Mr. Coder. Are there any other questions?
This is Jason Caseman. I have a question. I was wondering what methods the board has used to reach out to patients about the change to the 90-day supply calculation. And related to that, just anecdotally, I know some patients actually turn to their dispensaries as the primary resource for where they are on their 90-day supply. Where would the board direct patients to go for that information?
We would initially direct patients to go to their dispensary. That is their best resource. They can provide that information very quickly. In terms of reach out, we tried to educate as much as we possibly could. I believe, you're testing my memory, but I believe a notice was sent out to the patients. We also did a pretty thorough dispensary training, had a couple of webinars and required someone from each dispensary to be on that so that the dispensaries would be educated before we kicked off this change.
I'm sorry, and just to clarify, so you would direct patients to the dispensary, but the web form is also available and the hotline is also available?
Absolutely, yes. Okay. They can, if they know their date. The only problem with the web form is they would have to be sort of tracking what their purchases have been. Obviously, it's not going to tell them what their purchases have been, which the dispensary can provide that information. So I would encourage first the web form or the dispensary, and then if they're not successful in determining it that way, they can absolutely, the easiest thing is actually to send an email to the MMCP registry, which is mmcpregistry@pharmacy.ohio.gov, and then we can provide that information. But it is probably quicker and easier for them to get that from their dispensary.
All right. Any other committee members that would like to ask a question at this time of Ms. Martin Moore? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Martin Moore. Appreciate your very thorough review this month. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, I'd like to turn it over to the Department of Commerce with Mr. McIlvaine.
All right, thank you, Megan, and advisory committee members and program stakeholders for joining us today to discuss our program updates. As Megan mentioned, I'm Greg McIlvaine with the Ohio Department of Commerce, and in terms of our licensees, we are currently up to 23 cultivators growing medical marijuana, which includes 19 of the original 24 cultivators that were awarded provisional licenses. Our commerce licensees also include 3 operating testing labs and 23 processors manufacturing products, which represents 6 additional operating processors since our meeting in March. We also continue to anticipate a number of provisional licensees, including both cultivators and processors, to receive their certificates of operations in the coming months. In addition to pharmacy, we're also seeing a pretty significant increase in the number of active employees at commerce licensees, including a total of 2,126 employees as more facilities staff up after receiving their certificate of operation. This represents about a 21% increase in commerce licensee active employees since our meeting in March. We're also seeing a pretty significant activity with regards to patients purchasing medical marijuana over the past few months, including a total of 156.5 million in total program sales through July 21st. Right now, we're seeing a little more than 4.5 million in product sales per week. Notably, the average cost of both plant material and manufactured products has remained stable during this increase in patient demand. Commerce also continues to work closely with our licensees during the COVID-19 health crisis. We've communicated and licensees have implemented increased social distancing and health safety measures outlined by Governor DeWine and the Ohio Department of Health. We've also activated a non-office hour hotline to allow licensees to communicate any immediate issues or concerns, and have also provided information on best practices for sanitation and other facility safety protocols. In addition, Commerce initiated a temporary badge policy that provides licensees flexibility to print out temporary badges while their physical badges are being delivered. We've also implemented safety measures to allow our field agents to return to site visits to review facility compliance, and licensees have been very helpful in adhering to social distancing practices and providing our compliance agents with additional protective gear to conduct these inspections. So in addition to the testing lab requirements under the rules, the program is working to implement accountability measures to ensure quality testing, including voluntary and mandatory proficiency testing. The MMCP compliance team also has been restructured to consolidate all testing laboratories under one lead compliance agent. This will help to ensure consistency in the application of important code provisions and the implementation of our accountability measures. The compliance team also recently issued document requests to all operating testing labs to review their standing operating procedures and analytical methods, and is conducting site visits to review these lab procedures. Commerce also is working with Metric, our seed-to-sale tracking system, to implement configuration changes designed to minimize error and ensure compliance with testing requirements outlined in rule for each product type. The MMCP team last week released for public review a new streamlined lab application that is more efficient and user-friendly, including online submission through our e-licensing platform. The application also provides more clarity on the requirements to comply with testing lab rules. It is critical that the program has a sufficient number of testing labs to meet an increase in both patient demand and operating licensees to ensure that patients continue to have access to safe and affordable medical products. We are currently reviewing public input on the application and will go live with formal submissions next week. New lab applications will be reviewed and approved for a provisional license on a rolling basis. So thank you again for joining, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on commerce initiatives.
Thank you, Mr. McIlvaine. At this time, are there any committee members that do have any questions for Mr. McIlvaine? All right.
All right.
Seeing none, stick around. There might be a question for you later. You never know. All right. Thank you, Mr. McIlvaine. Appreciate it. Thanks. All right. I will now turn it over to our the Medical Board of Ohio with Executive Director Luca.
Thanks so much. Waiting for my system to load here. Okay, it looks like I have my presentation. All right. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Thanks everyone for being here with us this morning. As we get started, I'll share with you our first bit of our program that we oversee, which is with respect to so we do two parts of the program: regulating doctors who recommend medical marijuana and adding additional qualifying conditions to the program. So as you probably remember, each year there's a petition period in which we receive and then review newly considered conditions. And that most recent window was from December 1st through December 31st. I'm sorry, November 1st through December 31st of 2019. We received 27 petitions during that time, and the board ultimately determined that petitions for anxiety, autism spectrum, and cachexia would move forward to the next round of consideration. Anxiety and autism had been previously considered by the board, so in its review during this period, only the new scientific information that was presented for anxiety and autism were considered. There was a public comment period that was new for us this year. We did conduct that public comment period and received 142 unique comments, and those were along with the over 1,000 pre-scripted requests that we received to approve the conditions under consideration. So, you know, kind of a computer program pre-request that we had. So the next step in the process for us was the Medical Marijuana Committee meeting in June. And what they did there was that they voted to recommend cachexia to the full board and to reject the petitions for anxiety disorder and autism spectrum disorder. They were joined at that time by for cachexia by the expert that the board engaged with, Dr. Anastasia Rowland-Seymour, and the board had a dialogue about the addition of that new condition, cachexia. Dr. Rowland-Seymour's report originally had expressed some concern with marijuana itself, such as the safety of the product. But then after learning more about Ohio's program, she said that she felt more comfortable with medical marijuana as a treatment for cachexia, which ultimately guided the board's decision. The committee voted to recommend the petition for cachexia to the full board and to reject the petitions for anxiety and autism. And then the full board convened on July 8th and voted in agreement with the committee, which makes cachexia the first board-approved qualifying condition that has been added to the program. So our next submission period will be, again, same time frame, November 1st to December 31st of 2020. And you can see on your screen all of the different pieces that must be included in the petition. Anyone may submit a petition, and the board can consider previously rejected conditions, as it did this time with autism and anxiety disorder. However, if the board is considering something that has been previously rejected, there must be new scientific information included in the request for the board's consideration. So we now have 22 qualifying conditions. In order to receive a recommendation, patients have to visit a physician with the certificate to recommend, the CTR, who can confirm the diagnosis of the qualifying condition. Adding cachexia as a diagnosis option in the patient and caregiver registry will require a website update, and that's probably going to take a week or two. In the meantime, the medical board has sent out communication to our CTR physicians on the temporary steps they can take if they would like to add a cachexia patient to the registry. So the cachexia is operational, functionally. We're working on the website. So doctors can do it, can recommend for cachexia. We just don't have the permanent website update done yet, coming very soon. So moving on to the second part of the medical board's interaction with the program is our regulating of physicians who can recommend the medical marijuana. So today we have 655 total active certificates, and the search map really continues to be the most effective way for patients to locate those physicians with a CTR. Our search map includes physicians who have indicated they are actively making those recommendations. So a person logging on and using, or a person getting on the website and using this is actually seeing doctors who are actively recommending. There are 309 locations on the map today, and the user can filter that by city or county. And we do have some physicians who have listed multiple addresses on the map. We just recently conducted, I think since our last meeting, we shared with you that the physician annual report, or the survey was getting ready to go out. That did go out right around the time of our last meeting, and we have summarized that feedback and created our statutorily required CTR physician annual report. I believe that was provided to all of you in your materials for today. And as I said, we created that report based on the feedback that we got. So we thought the easiest way to do that would be to send a survey out and ask our physicians how they're using the program and what their thoughts are on the efficacy of the program. We received responses between March 4th and April 22nd. We had, as you can see, 435 respondents, which are actually about 2/3 of the active CTR holders at this time. So about a 2/3 response. And what we saw with the responses were that approximately 66% of our respondents had actively used their CTR and made a recommendation to their patient. So of the 435, about 2/3 have actually made that recommendation. So our survey was really focused on asking the physicians how satisfied they were with the effectiveness of medical marijuana in treating patients with each condition. And we wanted to make sure that we provided ample response options because physicians may not have treated patients with some of the qualifying conditions or may not have made any recommendation at all. So we wanted to give them a lot of options. They had the options to skip the question or choose from very dissatisfied, satisfied, neutral, satisfied, very satisfied, and not applicable. And from the results, what we were able to see was a trend in which the qualifying conditions that respondents were most commonly made recommendations for and observed the level of satisfaction for treatment were pain, fibromyalgia, cancer, PTSD, and inflammatory bowel disease. So what we also noticed in our survey results was that, many CTR holders had never made a recommendation. So 34% of the respondents had never made a recommendation. And so what that made us realize was that there may be physicians who don't want to use their CTR, who want to take that piece off of their license. Our former process was actually a surrender process, and they would surrender that CTR recommendation. Surrender is complicated, and it actually has different meanings across the country with different medical boards. And so, this is a non-disciplinary dropping of the CTR, right? So they're not dropping it because they were under a disciplinary process. They're dropping it because they just don't want it attached to their license any longer. So we have changed our renewal process so that a doctor who has a CTR and who no longer wants to carry that CTR forward can actually remove that during the license application process, as opposed to going through what we consider a more formal process, which is a surrender. Okay, so that is it for me, and I'm happy to take any questions that you all may have.
Thank you, Ms. Luca. Are there any questions for Director Luca at this time, committee members?
Hi, Stephanie. It's Amol Soyan here. Could you comment on how telemedicine in the COVID crisis may have impacted medical marijuana from a physician standpoint?
So I think that, we worked closely with pharmacy on how patients could have access to medical marijuana, and we did relax or look at our rules for telemedicine so that we could ensure that our patients were having access to that continuing through the COVID crisis. And so again, we talked with pharmacy, and we wanted to make sure that the in-person requirement was not a prohibition to patients actually being able to participate.
All right. Any other follow-up questions, Dr. Soin?
I have a question, Sheriff.
Thank you.
All right. Sheriff Lenhart, I hear you're piping in. Go ahead and ask your question, please.
Yeah, the question is about law enforcement. We would be interested statewide what kind of arrests or theft, fraud, any of those things that would be on the law enforcement platter.
No. Why would you think there'd be anything?
Oh, Dr. Luca, Director Luca, did you hear the question?
I heard the end of the question. It faded out a little bit. Could you give it to me again? Sheriff, are you able to repeat your question? I apologize.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. The question was about law enforcement. Any issues from dispensaries or any other licensing that would require any kind of enforcement from your level or from local law enforcement level?
So, I think I can speak to this from the medical board's angle. And, there are different parts of the program I think that would touch this, so commerce or pharmacy might actually weigh in on this question as well. I think from the medical board's perspective, if we have something that in any way is criminal, our approach is to then work out to reach out to our local law enforcement partners and talk with them and alert them as to potential criminal activity. And then we work with them jointly on an administrative track, and then there's a criminal track as well. So certainly if in our work with physicians we suspected any criminal activity, we would be reaching out with our local partners.
That was my question. Have we had any of those? What kind of numbers, if any?
Yes, I have been with the board just for about 7 months, and not to my knowledge have we had any. I don't think that we had any that have come before me as well.
Thank you.
All right. Any other committee members for questions for Director Luca?
This is Megan Lawrence. I have a question for the anxiety and the autism, or these qualifying conditions that are not approved or not getting approved. Is there anything that you guys are putting out there after these meetings, as far as like either like a question and answer or something that the public can access as far as why they're not getting approved, to maybe help like better understand that, other than it's just not?
So I don't think we've put any documentation out, but I can take that question to the board for consideration. All of our board meetings are public, and the committees have been public and actually are on I think our YouTube channel right now, including our committee sessions.
That's not good enough for reason. You make everybody stumble for it. That's not good enough.
And so this is Dr. Soin.
Go ahead, Dr. Soin. I hear you. This is Megan.
I also wanted to comment on that, just because I've been in those meetings as a member of the medical board. And I want to say a couple of things. First of all, our meetings are streamed and available, and they're public meetings. So it's one way we outreach the public. Secondly, one thing I can tell you is every time we've had one of these meetings, almost immediately after we vote, there is media releases and press releases done, not from the medical board directly, but from media outlets about each of the conditions.
You should do it directly,
it's
and not
funny
pass
because
off the buck to
oftentimes
somebody
we
else
see
who's
these
on top.
releases. Sorry, we see these media releases come out even while we're in the meeting, but to be honest, just so everyone here knows, and for the sake of transparency, the reasons why these have been denied to date is just the lack of evidence and efficacy for the particular condition, balancing it with the risks of marijuana to the patient. So if we take some examples like autism in a child, we understand the risks of autism and the benefits of marijuana in those conditions. However, we've had several experts give us testimony that say the risk of marijuana to the developing brain of a child far outweighs the benefits of medical marijuana in treating symptoms. So in a situation like that, that's why things happen, and these are mentioned in our meetings as well as in media releases that are done. And just so you know, those releases aren't done by the board themselves, but we definitely see that the information that was in the meeting is definitely out there in the public.
I think that's kind of my concern, is the fact that a lot of, we do get a lot of, questions towards us, and I don't want to direct them to anything that's media driven. So maybe if there was something like that we could have on our website, that we kind of direct people to, is maybe like that question and answer. So then we don't see, the same reviews coming around, for like a third time or a fourth time, something along that lines, as well as then public not necessarily having to filter through a bunch of media or videos, things like that, that we can just share some sort of a document link along that lines. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's excellent feedback, actually. And, obviously unilaterally, I can't promise anything right now at this moment, but it's absolutely certainly something that we'll take back and figure out a better way to provide some outreach on those specific things, because I clearly realize it's an issue that a lot of people are interested in digging deeper in.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for the question, Ms. Lawrence and Dr. Soin. Any other questions from committee members? All right, I'll ask any other questions from committee members for any of our departments for Mr. McIlvaine, Ms. Sharon Martin Moore, or Director Luca at this time.
This is Jason Caseman. With medical marijuana employees being essential workers, even throughout the stay-at-home order, I'm wondering do we have any information about cases that have popped up in the among the industry's workers?
This is Sharon. I don't have an exact number. We definitely have had situations where dispensaries have had to close down because one of their employees has tested positive. And so generally our compliance team will work with them to, make sure that they're getting the dispensary cleaned, that any employees that have been exposed to them, are being tested and quarantined as needed and things like that. So it's kind of a case-by-case situation. We haven't had, to my knowledge, a lot, but I think I'm aware of at least 3. So.
I'm sorry, and then just real quickly, do we have any idea how what's happened with those workers? Are they being put on pandemic unemployment assistance? Are there paid leave policies? Are they just out of work until they test back in?
That would not be something that the board would oversee. That would be an employment issue with the dispensary employment. We don't have any type of board requirements regarding that issue that I'm aware of.
Mr. Caseman, any other follow-up questions?
No more. Thank you.
All right. Committee members.
This is Mike Stanek. Just not necessarily a question, just a comment. It's one that I've made in the past prior to your being on the committee chairwoman. I would find it very helpful, and I'm just probably a little bit slower than most of the members. I'd find it very helpful to be able to have the slide presentations in advance of the meeting. For me, trying to copy down information off of the slides while listening, taking notes and digesting everything, and then trying to come up with questions that are germane, I find to be very challenging. And if I could have those, even a day in advance so that I have some time to digest at least the basic information that's contained in there and have those slides in front of me to make notes on rather than having to try to rewrite that information down, I'd find that beneficial for myself.
Thanks for the comment, Mr. Stanek. Ms. Martin Moore, I understand committee members were provided a slide deck as of yesterday. Is that correct, Mr. Stanek? Were you able to receive that, or would you prefer more than 24 hours advance?
No, I'm sorry. All I recall receiving was the State Medical Board of Ohio CTR report, which I found to be very helpful. I don't recall receiving the slide deck.
Okay.
It was sent in a separate email from that yesterday morning. So I'll confirm that we have your email address correct, and
I know last time when we had something go out, I was not included on that either.
Okay.
So maybe there's an issue with my email address, and if so, I apologize.
I will double check, and we will try to make sure that you receive them well in advance in the future and that you have a chance to review them. Thank you.
Yeah. And Mr. Stanek, that is a wonderful suggestion as well. I agree, making sure that we're giving our committee members ample time so that we do have a robust discussion during these meetings is definitely a necessary need for these. Thank you. Perfect. All right. Any additional questions or comments from our committee members at this time? All right. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn today's committee meeting.
So moved.
And is that Mr. Stanek?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Stanek. Is there a second to that motion?
This is Marcy Seidel. I second that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Seidel. I appreciate that. And I will actually take roll for that, for those motions. Ms. Seidel?
I agree.
Ms. Abel?
Agree.
Mr. Coder? Mr. Coder? We'll skip over you and come back to you. Mr. Caseman?
Yes.
Ms. Lawrence?
Yes.
Sheriff Lenhart? Sheriff Lenhart? We'll come back to you. Dr. Mitchell?
Agree.
Ms. Mosca?
Yes.
Mr. Stanek?
Yes.
Dr. Wenk? Dr. Wenk? I think when we muted the audience, we muted a few of our participants, our committee members. Dr. Soin?
Yes.
Mr. Stock?
Yes.
I will come back to Mr. Coder. Sheriff Lenhart? Or Dr. Wenk? I believe we do have a sufficient amount of votes to adjourn today's meeting. Today's meeting is now adjourned. I appreciate everybody's time today and involvement with our committee members. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.